Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our virtual membership meeting. This one was a makeup, I believe. Is that correct, Amanda? From March.
That is correct, yes.
We had to reschedule. So thanks for everybody. Thanks to everybody for attending. Today is 1 hour of continuing education credit, and it's a general meeting panel discussion on appraisals. So make sure that you stay logged in the entire time and participate again with polling in order to receive the Con Ed credit that's available today. And again, it's 1 hour of Con Ed or continuing education credit. So just a few other announcements. Appraiser USPAP class in Michigan Law with current selectors on Tuesday, June 30th. So if you guys are interested in that, please register to make sure that you get enrolled for that. August, we have another virtual membership meeting with Lee Brown. She's a national speaker. She's one of my very favorites. I'm super excited to have her coming in virtually to talk to us, and that's August 13th. So make sure you mark your calendars for that one. You are not going to want to miss that. She's amazing. September, again, virtual membership meeting with National Realtor Safety Speaker Carl Carter. That's September 3rd. And also mark your calendars. Our RPAC golf outing has been rescheduled for September the 10th. So I'm looking forward to that and actually seeing everybody in person. So today we have a meeting sponsor. So Luke, thank you so much from Cutco. We appreciate you sponsoring us. And I'm going to give him 4 minutes to speak here shortly as soon as I introduce everybody else. But we want to thank you and all of our other affiliate members for doing everything that you guys do, for helping us with our digital roundtables and participating with everything. So as a reminder, realtors, we are back to work, but we need to work responsibly. So make sure we're wearing masks, practicing our physical distancing, and washing our hands. And also thank you guys, the panelists, for joining us. We have Aaron Clark from Dart Bank as our moderator. And then our panelists for today are Lanny Burnett of LSB Appraisal Services, Deb Collins from Dart Bank, she's an underwriter there, and Hans Schwab with J. Hans Schwab Appraisal. So Luke, I'll let you take it first, and then we'll move right into our panelists.
Perfect. Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, Lansing Association of Realtors. I'm here to talk to you about how to stay top of mind with every single client that you work with, and really to make sure that your clients stay your clients forever. And the best part is that it won't cost you any more money than what you're already spending, and you won't have to take any time away from your business to implement this either. So every good realtor knows at the end of the transaction, it should really not be the end of the relationship, but it should be the beginning of the relationship that you build with that client over a lifetime. And the reason it's so important to really stay in the forefront of your client's mind when it comes to being their trusted resource for real estate or for mortgages, if you're a loan officer, is because if your clients can't remember you, then they can't use you again and they can't refer you business, right? And the last time I checked, the name of the game is repeat business and referrals. And at the end of every transaction, there's an opportunity to be able to really brand your business and secure that mind share as your client's trusted resource. And for most agents and for most loan officers, it sort of goes by the wayside. And of course, the opportunity that I'm talking about is your closing gift. So if you think about what happens to most of the closing gifts that clients receive, 90% of them are consumed. So they eat them, they drink them, they spend them. And do your clients love the gift that you give them? Sure. But the question is what happens to it 12 months, 24 months, 36 months later? Again, 90% of those gifts are eaten or drank or consumed right away. And the other 10%, although they may last longer, they generally aren't used all that often. So your doormats, your door knockers, your pictures, paintings, coasters, clocks, vases, again, those things are great. They just kind of sit there and end up collecting dust or get tucked away on a shelf or in a cupboard somewhere. And so Cutco is the perfect solution for your closing gift. And if you haven't heard of Cutco before, I want to ask this of the audience. If you are a Cutco owner, so if you placed an order before, if you use our product at home, or if you've given the gifts, if you can just type into the chat box, just share a quick story about maybe how long you've had Cutco, what you like about it. And I trust those are starting to come in. And if you're not familiar with Cutco, we've been around since the 40s. They're super high quality, American made, guaranteed forever. On Modern Marvels, History Channel is the world's sharpest. And what we do in our closing gifts division is we take your information and we engrave your name and your number and your logo on there. And it does a couple things for your business. And the most important thing is you can show a hand on Zoom on the reactions feature, or type in the chat box, or show your hands. How many of you have used a knife in the kitchen in the last 7 days? Right, so that's why this makes sense for everyone. The kitchen is the most popular room in the home. So when your clients are entertaining and having people over, then these are out and being used. And that's why it's so important to have something that is going to be not only out for your clients where they're using it on a daily basis, but also when they're entertaining, having friends and family and everything over as well. There's also another big thing is the tax benefits you get for engraving your information on the product. Again, we can do your logo, your name, number, the spreader behind me. We do keep spreading the word a lot of times as the engraving for a referral gift. We do sharpest realtor in town sometimes on the knives. I even once had an agent ask if we could engrave quit cutting my commission. But in either case, it's 100% legally tax deductible as a marketing or advertising expense rather than being a client gift, which you're only limited to $25 as a write-off. And another big thing is this is an easy system to put in place so that you have a gift that works for every single client. We've done a ton of market research to find that 100% of your clients eat on a daily basis. And so it's a universal gift that you don't have to run around at the last minute and try to pick out something personal for the client right before the closing. It's something that when you place an order, we send you a small supply of gifts. You have them on hand in the gift box with the little bow, so it's ready to just grab and give out. So the gifts range between $75 to $300. And when you place an order, we generally get you started with a year's supply or a half-year supply. We can bill you over 6 or 12 months. And then that way you just have the gifts on hand, ready to go. And then the last thing as I wrap up, I'm going to make an offer for the Lansing Association. And this is just as a thank you for supporting me, for giving me the chance to be involved in your industry. And it's a thank you. It's not something that I do to pressure. It's just as a thank you for the first 5 order after this meeting. I'll buy you $100 in Cutco that you can use at home. And you can see all the people in the chat who have had their knives and how much they love them. I'm going to put my number in the chat. And if you want to grab out your phone and text me, this is how you take advantage. It's 616-295-5537. Again, that's my cell phone number. You can text me your name and email and the word sharp. The first 5 agents to place an order after the meeting, I'll buy you $100 in free Cutco. And with that, I'll turn the screen back over. Thank you so much for your support.
Thank you so much, Luke. We appreciate your support in being an affiliate, and Cutco knives are awesome. So, Aaron and panelists, if you guys want to get started, you are on.
I don't think there's much I need to do. I think Lanny and Hans, if you guys want to start with some input.
Hans, you're on mute. There we go. I'm off mute now. Thanks, Debbie. Okay, I'll start out a little bit with just the appraisal process. Many, especially everyone on the call today, you've probably had to deal with an appraiser at one point or another. The process that we go through when we get a request in, it's going to be the client, which in most cases for the real estate transaction is going to be the lender. The lender is the intended user. They're the client. They're the requester. They're the one that actually identifies us as the person to perform the appraisal. There's a lot of rotation systems. There's appraisal management. Some lenders have specific list of appraisers. So we get those requests in directly from the lender. They are the client. They are the intended user. The borrower's name are on those reports. There's a process that the borrower may actually contribute to paying for that appraisal, but the appraisal is actually for the intended use of underwriting the collateral for a mortgage. And so that all goes to the client. So that's where we get our request from as the bank is involved or the lender. Fannie, Freddie, Rural Development, FHA, VA, they set the guidelines along with the lender and the investors that are investing in these loans, as well maybe a PMI company or somebody else that has some skin in the game here. The forms that we use were developed by these entities. Fannie and Freddie developed these forms and they redeveloped them over time. The certifications that we abide by to do the appraisal that we're actually certifying that we've done, haven't done, et cetera, and the reports are part of our guideline, and those were set by Fannie and Freddie. We, as appraisers, are licensed here in the state of Michigan. We have to follow the state of Michigan guidelines as well as the Uniform Standards of Appraisal Practice, USPAP, which is the national guidelines for appraising. We take classes for all this. We get recertified by these, by the state of Michigan every 2 years. And we have Con Ed, just like we're taking this morning, that we have to do to go through that process. The appraisal here, everyone picture kind of an upside down pyramid or an upside down triangle. We're going to start out with a wide description of what we're doing. We're going to describe the property, who our client is. We're going to get down to a neighborhood. Where is this property at? We're going to describe a little bit about that neighborhood. Then we're going to get into the market. We're going to describe what's happening in the market specific to that neighborhood and maybe to a region. Next, we're going to get into details of the site, describing what's happening on that property, if it's the highest and best use to have that structure there, or any structure. Maybe it's just vacant land that we're doing an appraisal on. Whatever it is, we're going to make some notations on that site. Then we're going to get into details of the structure. And that's when we're either on site or at our desk or whatever sources we're using. We're going to find out what the details are of these structures on the property. We're going to detail those into the report. So you can get a sense that we're narrowing down. We're starting out with that wide address all the way down to what's on that property, what's there. Then we're going to get into a market comparison. And this is where the comps that we're also familiar with, if someone's doing a CMA or if we're doing an appraisal, we're looking for the data that's going to help determine what the market value of this property is. And those comps, the pertinent details of those comps are going to be noted in a grid. This form that was produced by Fannie and Freddie some years back, many people are familiar with, but I'll just do a real quick description of that. You're going to see addresses, you're going to see sale prices, then you're going to see some pertinent details of those properties. There's going to be adjustments for differences. So the sale price is at the top. By the time you get down to the bottom of that grid, it's what the adjusted sale price is, and it's what the subject property or what those properties would have sold for if they were more like the subject. So you got to think of it as we got a bunch of comps with sale prices. Now we've narrowed it down to the differences. We've made adjustments for differences. And now we're down to what those properties would have sold for if they were more like the subject. The ideal is to get them all like the subject, which isn't possible. But in some cases, we'll see some that have very little adjustments, some that'll have more. Once we get down to the bottom of that, we're going to reconcile all that data that we're seeing, that we're using. And that's going to give us our indications for market value. And from there, we're going to deliver that report to the lender. They're going to have the opportunity to underwrite it, to look through the details, to make sure that we've met those needs, met everything that's necessary for that appraisal to be part of the collateral underwriting. All right, back to you, Debbie.
I'm going to jump in really quickly, actually, first, Debbie, sorry. I'm sending out a poll question to everybody, so please answer it. I'm going to leave it up for a few minutes, but this is one of the ways that we are measuring Con Ed. It's a very, very easy question, so just answer it to show that you're here and paying attention. I just want to give you a heads up that's coming out. So, sorry, Debbie, go for it.
Okay, thank you, Hans. That was a very good overview of the appraisal process. From when Hans and Lanny are done, when the appraisers are done, comparing, telling us about the market, then the appraisal comes into the lender. Our job is to review it. And what we're looking for is accuracy. Number one, is the address right? Is the location right? We have quality on the appraisal. Then the comps are for what the real estate community, that's what you guys are most interested in, is the comps and how a lender looks at them. And largely we do exactly what Hans said. Did they use comparables that are like the subject, and did they make adjustments and at the end of it get to a home that could be very similar to the one we have? Very simply put, when I look at an appraisal and I'm looking at comps, I take a step back from the data and go, okay, if I was buying our subject property, would I also be looking at these for comparables? If I was shopping for a house, would these be on my range? And if I'm shopping for a 3-bedroom and you got a 1-bedroom, chances are I wouldn't be looking at that. Now, if my subject was a 1-bedroom and you had a 3-bedroom that's in the right sales price and around the same square foot, I might look at that. So it really is this, if the person who's buying this home or anybody who's buying this home, would they look at the rest too? So they're comparable to the subject. Now we do have guidelines, so how much adjustment can go into it. And the higher adjustment you get, if you exceed 25%, then we scrutinize it a little bit more, because now we're stretching, we're taking that house that is vastly different and trying really hard to make it look like our subject. And chances are we would find that I wouldn't really look at that house. It probably started too high in its price. So if I'm looking for a $150,000 house, I probably wouldn't go look at a $250,000 house. So it's really not comparable, and we're trying to make it work. We do other things in the background. We pull reports that give us a wider view of comps, just to make sure that we do have the best comparables that are available. We look to make sure that the subject property is appraised as is, or if the appraiser made any comment to repairs or the soundness of the structure, if anything needs to be done. Cosmetics, for most type of loans, we don't overly worry about those. If anybody has any specific questions, I'm happy to ask about that. But in a nutshell, that's what we do. We underwrite literally the appraisal. We go through. We used to red pen it and just circle things that we had issues. Now it's more of a technical review. We at Dart Bank work with really good appraisers, so it's not that hard of a process most of the time.
I'd like to add a couple things.
Go ahead, Lanny.
You talked about looking at the homes and looking at the similarities of them. And we kind of use that as a principal substitution. You know, would you substitute that property for the other ones, which is a concept of what people are doing in their mind. And also you talked about if there aren't any comparables or you have large adjustments, one of the things we do is there may be a reason why we use them, and the underwriters want to know those reasons. A lot of times what you're trying to do is provide a similar style, and the only style is a lot larger. They do look at that. So that's why you have the large adjustments. But as long as we explain it and explain there aren't any available, I think that the most underwriters look at those things. And another point you made regarding items in need of repair, there's different things, you know, when you have an as-is appraisal, a lot of times we put deferred maintenance items. The lender wants to know those deferred maintenance items. They make the final call on those items. It may not be a real big deal, but we note those in an FHA appraisal. Those things may need to be taken care of, but in conventional, they may not need to be. We may consider it as is, but the lender they make the final call.
Thank you, Lonnie. I'm sorry, Debbie, I'm jumping in here again. I just want to remind everyone that poll question is still up. If you don't see it, it might be hiding behind your main Zoom window, but we do need your participation in that so that we can give you Con Ed. So please find that and participate in it. If you do not see it, throw something up in the Q&A so that I'm aware of that. We have some questions that are coming in. So do you guys want me to bring those up to you now?
That'd be great.
All righty.
Sounds good.
I have here, have lenders changed their standards due to the current situation? I had an appraiser demand to see the home inspection report. He required a pressure release valve even though it wasn't put on the inspection addendum.
Well, that's a good question. I don't normally demand to look at the inspection. If I'm at a property and the owner's there, or sometimes I can ask questions relating to that, and a lot of people will tell you, making demands on a pressure, a lot of times it comes down to a safety issue. That's probably the biggest thing, even in conventional loans. Safety, those are the deferred maintenance versus the required repairs. If it is a safety issue and it's a conventional, most of the time the lender will want those taken care of. If it's an FHA, they will definitely want those things taken care of. So again, safety is a big thing with the lenders. Actually, the three things with FHA are safety, security, and soundness.
One of the other things that we might be experiencing is during the pandemic here, the guidelines for Fannie and Freddie are allowing many of us to do appraisals without leaving the desk or as an exterior only inspection. And it's up to the appraiser to find every bit of data they can to make sure that they're providing a reliable report under these guidelines. So if we're not accessing the interior of a house, you may have an appraiser request something as extensive as the inspection report, especially since FHA right now is allowing for appraisals to be performed without an interior inspection. Not all lenders are going to accept that, but it is part of the guidelines. So I think if maybe you're in a market, especially last month, where we were having real issues with property access and concerns about that, we were looking for every bit of detail we could. So that may have been what happened in that case, especially if it was FHA or VA or some aspect where the property wasn't accessed on the interior.
I think the key thing for everybody to understand is the agencies, all of them pretty much have been more lenient with the type of appraisals that we need right now. But the appraisers are still required to, like Hans said, find out as much. They can't make any extraordinary assumptions. If they are doing a drive-by, they still have to find out a lot of detail about that house. They're getting really creative, and there might be some confusion too on what is required and what isn't, but they're doing FaceTime videos with having the homeowner take their phone and walk them through so they can look at things. They are, if they can't FaceTime, they're having pictures sent to them. I would bet that appraisal was probably a government type, either RD or FHA or VA, that require more stringent look. The appraisers are not off the hook for those things. They still have to find a way to get that information. So I would suspect that they're going to rely on you, the realtors, a little bit more, the list agents or the home owner, to get some of the information that they used to be able to get when they walked in the home. We do have a lot of appraisers in our area that are still going in. I think we should probably take a minute to talk about that. Hans or Lanny, if you guys would like to educate them a little bit on what you would ask of a homeowner if you're going to go in the home, what to do to make it easier and safer for everybody.
Sure, I could. I'm one of those appraisers that continue to do the interior inspection, and in saying that, I'm very careful. It's from the beginning call to the listing agent to set the appointment, and if the house is going to be vacant, I mean, that's great. I still wear masks, gloves, and the booties, or take off my shoes. so that's, but if there are people in the house, and there are a lot of people home these days, it varies. Sometimes we move people outside if there are a lot of activity in the house. A lot of times there may be one or two people in. They will either wear a mask or we stay a safe distance. One of the things I do too, and I found it very effective in all the appraisals that people will be there, is I always want the contact person of the person will be there. I always text them or call them 15 minutes before I get there. And I always start outside first, so they know I'm there. And then I ask them to turn on all the lights, open up all the doors, and they even open the door for me as I walk in. They stay a safe distance, and when I want to look at water running, I have them turn on the water. I touch nothing. I even try to advise them on improvements, even if the homeowner's there, to text them to me. I really don't even want to take a piece of paper. And occasionally I will, but I'm wearing gloves. I, have hand sanitizer, and that seems to be pretty effective. It's me personally, because as Hans put it, we are on the hook for the information. I found the best way to be on the hook for information is to be the person looking at the information personally. Even, because I look at watermarks, I look at any kind of deferred maintenance, especially in a sale. Things that aren't big could be big in a sale if they're very noticeable and we didn't comment on them. That's just me, and I'm still healthy. I'm still here. Everybody, if anybody shows signs of any illness or sickness, I've had a couple situations, I will not perform that appraisal. So, and then it may be converted to an exterior.
Yeah, and I can share a little bit. I'm very similar. I've been doing mostly the appraisals where I don't have to access the occupied homes. I occasionally, that's not going to be possible. So I'm setting up a similar protocol. I'm requesting, though, that the house be vacant while I'm there. That way, if somebody can be out of the house for a period of time, that's, I think, best. I am wearing the mask. I am doing the hand coverings, requesting things that are on. But I think just as we don't understand the process going forward, if we're going to see additional cases that come, to be precautious. And I think also for the comfort of those people that are in the home, and also for my own safety, I'm just doing a little bit more of requesting that the house not be occupied while I'm there during that time frame. And people are able to. There are some cases where somebody is having to be can't leave the house, or they themselves have a condition where they really don't want the appraiser in at all. So that's why it's so great that Fannie, Freddie, and the lenders have agreed to let us do some alternative gathering of data where we don't have to access the interiors.
Yeah.
I have another question here, if we're ready to move on from that.
Okay.
Does an appraiser use square footage above grade that matches the square footage noted with the county assessor site? For instance, Ingham County says square footage of property is 2940 square feet. The appraiser's report showed square footage to be 2875. Any explanation for the difference?
I can jump in on that one. No, I do not use the square footage from the assessor, township, or county. The only time I would use that is if I'm doing an exterior only and cannot personally measure. I personally measure the property, and that's what I go by. The reason for the difference, a lot of times, there are many reasons. One, you may have a bi-level. The assessor usually shows top and bottom as the total square footage. And from our reports, a lot of times we're looking at above grade square footage and below grade square footage. And then we show that on the report. We actually split those out. A lot of times there's a new build job. They submit the report to the assessor. Then they decide to make the screen porch a part of the above grade gross living area. And a lot of times that's not submitted to the assessor. So you have a difference there. Or a lot of times the homeowner will finish an area over the garage since the time the assessor was out there. So there is a lot of difference. I would strongly recommend that the real estate listing agent find a way, whether they do it themselves or have an appraiser put the square footage on the listing sheet, because that can, the market analysis, that's one of the starting points of determining that value. And I've actually have seen square footage of a 2,000 square foot home off by 400 or 500 square feet, and that makes a big difference in the sale price. And then you have problems after that if you had too high or too low of a sale price.
I would agree, because I think as a broker or an agent, you can kind of get a gut feeling whether or not something might be wrong, especially something that large in difference. And it is a good idea to have those verified if you need them. From an appraisal process, we are required to document for most of our lending situations when we're doing an interior appraisal how we measure the property. And so we're not, in many cases, I can't speak for every appraiser, but we're not just going to be using the assessor data. So that's why you're going to see a discrepancy. And on the exteriors or these desktops that we're performing, we may be on site, but if you've got a Cape Cod, you've got those finished areas with dormers, etc., they're not accessible to us when we're not on the inside of the house. So that's when we'll have to use that other data.
What is the proper method to measure square footage on a traditional 2-story home?
Well, what I normally do, you measure it from the outside of the house. And as Hans talked about it, you could have a 2-story colonial, which is pretty easy to look at. And one other point I was going to make too is even in listing agents, you are provided a lot of times with the sketch from the assessor's office. Take a look at that and see if it kind of matches the house. And if it does, then you're pretty close. But in measuring Cape Cods or hip roof homes or homes with rooms over garages, that's why I start outside first, because I can get a real good idea of what you got up there. And many times once I get inside, I'm fooled. That dormer and that Cape Cod-ish looking house has no second floor. It's maybe cathedral ceilings, vaulted ceilings, or maybe just an open attic. Or that hip roof looks like just a kind of a square upstairs, and it turns out to be lots of ins and outs, room over the garage, things of that nature. So you kind of have to, and this is, doing it from the outside first gives me a real good idea of what we got. And maybe it's a little game I play with my play, is to try to determine what's actually inside. And once I get in there, it changes, and but then we get the correct square footage, and then we have to sketch it out so that the lenders can see exactly the rooms upstairs.
Another appraiser who is attending the meeting shared a lot of assessors will include the second floor area of a great room with a cathedral ceiling as square footage as well, and that cannot be included by appraisers.
That is correct. If it doesn't have floor space, it's not gross living area. It can be an accessory or a nice amenity, and you'll see that definitely in the sketches from the assessors, where they'll do a 1.75 times the first floor for space. That may take into consideration that there's a cathedral, et cetera, in there. So that's why when we're actually doing the physical measuring, running our tape measures inside the house and outside for those kinds of spaces, determining that big colonial that looks like it's complete 2-story has got a huge 2-story foyer, we're going to remove that from the gross living area if the assessor has that included.
And I would also say that if you really think there's a big difference, find a way to measure it up. Because I've had a case in point where the 2,000 square foot listing house is actually a 2,400, and the seller actually left about $25,000 on the table. And with that, in turns, could be problems for the listing agent down the road, just because the square footage was not correct. You just went by the assessor. There's really no shortcut for that. We don't take shortcuts at all on that. And I think it's important that the agents at least have the correct square footage to begin with.
You know, that also helps in the comparable data, because we're just like the agents are using CMAs to help present a value for the property, a listing recommendation. We're also having a look at the comp data, and the MLS will look at the assessor data, but we're not out physically measuring each comparable. So the more accurate the comparable data is, overall, we're going to have better comparables. So that definitely shows in an appraisal if you've got a particular township or market where they have got a lot of issues with that data, and it's making it into the MLS comparables. When we're using those comparables in our appraisals, that's the data we're using, what's reported. So if you have a correction, you can get that in the MLS, make a notation that this is a more accurate representation of the house via an appraisal or another process for measurement. That'll be better comp data.
One other point, and this is a case in point, that there was a 1,600 square foot ranch with a beautiful walkout, totally finished basement, and the agent put the above grade gross living area as 3,200 square feet. That does a lot of disservice to everybody, because if they're listing that house and someone wants about a 1,400 to 1,800 square foot ranch with a walkout, it won't even show up in their search. And then the comps, it'll miss our comp search, because that's one of the guidelines too. So it's just really important. There is a place for a gross finished area, but make sure the above grade and below grade are accurate.
And on the lending side, just to add the importance to the square footage, Fannie and Freddie are keeping track. Every appraisal that is done on a conventional loan that's being sold to Fannie and Freddie goes into a database. And as an underwriter, when we get a new appraisal, we have to run a UCDP on it, which is comparing the data that Fannie and Freddie have. One of the areas that I consistently have a little issue with is square footage. The report will come back and tell me an older appraisal had a different square footage. If it's a small difference, I can usually just look at the report I'm doing and be okay. When it gets larger, then I have to investigate. So we have to find out which appraisal was right. The one from 2 years ago that Fannie or Freddie have information on, or the one that's in front of me. Now for real estate communities, that can slow your deal down, because now I've got to get a hold of the appraiser, try to find out what happened, talk about an appraisal that I really can't see. I'm just getting some data that I have to verify that the appraisal in front of me is accurate. Sometimes that means I might have to order a desk review or a field review of that appraisal if I can't find out a good reason, and if it's a large enough discrepancy. You know, under 100 square feet, usually we run with it. When you get to 200 or 300 square feet, then we have a problem. Especially if we have our current appraisal shows more square footage than a past one. We need to make sure that that's accurate. So that can take time away from your closing date, trying to feather all that out. So the more accurate we can get on every property with square foot, the better off we're going to be.
Yes, I agree.
We have a request. Please talk about second floor ceiling heights in older Cape Cods and bungalows, and ANSI measuring guidelines for GLA SF.
I can make a quick comment on that. A lot of times you'll see a finished Cape Cod, and it'll come up to a wall that's about 5 feet high on each side. That's a good guideline. Other times you'll see a Cape Cod that goes right down to the point. But the floor area is pretty wide, but there's a good part of that that's not usable. And I still envision that 5 foot wall. And that's what I measure by.
The ceiling height itself, I think for years the standard has been closer to 7 feet. Each market can be a little different, and I think if you get really low ceiling heights, it is more or less a finished attic at that point. It might be heated, it might have floors, etc. But I'm 6'3" almost, so when I get up to a second story space, if that ceiling is right at my head, then it's a finished attic. And you may have some markets where every comparable is like that. The bungalows are going to have really low ceilings in the center. It doesn't mean that space doesn't have value. It just has to be determined whether or not it's part of the gross living area. So it might be a separate line item adjustment in an appraisal, just like maybe an enclosed porch that doesn't have heat has value. A nice sunroom with beautiful windows that doesn't have heat, it still has value, but it's usually a separate amenity, a line item, not as part of the gross living area of the main house. And so you're going to get variances on those second floors. I think appraisers will view those differently. 7 feet is definitely a more reasonable height when you're getting there, but I think anything over 6.5 feet for a lot of appraisers is acceptable.
Can we talk about how you would measure a walkout basement?
Well, go ahead. A walkout basement, is a basement. There is value there. You have a finished area and the amenities. And the best way to value something like that is if you have a walkout finished basement that when you're sitting inside, it looks like you're above grade. To extract that value, the best way to value that is to find a comparable with that same feature. And the best way to determine that value is envision another property identical with that finished basement walkout, and then in a second one with no finished basement but the same walkout. Normally someone's going to pay more for that house with the walkout finish, and you extract that value from the market, and that's really what it's worth.
Yep, that's perfect, because it really is, at that point, there's an adjustment that can be made between a non-walkout and a walkout. The gross living area below grade has value. It's just a separate adjustment. That gross living area above grade is adjusted with the comparables in that line, and the below grade is separate. And then the amenities of that below grade are separate. So the walkout is going to be more valuable than a non-walkout in most markets. Just like Lanny said, we have to look to see where that adjustment can be extracted from, and in a market, side-by-side comparisons of maybe even in that appraisal or outside of that appraisal from a prior or recent appraisal will give us an idea of what adjustments made. There's value to all those spaces. They're not excluded. They're in the appraisal. They're just separate from the above grade gross living area.
Amanda, can we, I know there are a ton of questions here. I see a couple that may be a little bit more on the lending side. Are the rebuttals, and then the rebuttal process, I believe there was a question on here. And the other one that I would like to see, and maybe just briefly touch on it, are the 20,000 over asking price offers on appraisals. I think those will kind of go hand in hand. If it comes in short, is a rebuttal process that they can do. And actually, Debbie, from an underwriter perspective, maybe could you touch on that as well?
Sure, I could touch on both. 20,000 over asking, that's, everybody holds their breath and waits for that appraisal to come in. I can only speak for Dart Bank and what we do. We always have a line open of communication between ourselves, the appraisers, and the real estate agents. What the agents need to do is provide us with the comps, and then we communicate with the appraisers to see if there's anything that they can do. Sometimes, maybe a sale closed more recent than the appraisal, or something that they don't. We're always welcome. You provide us with the comps. we take a quick peek at them. We shoot them over to the appraiser, asking them to consider them. That is absolutely always well within your right. We would never tell anybody no. I know every lender's a little different on that process, though. 20,000 over, I don't have to tell you guys, you know, you're holding your breath, waiting to see what that appraisal comes in at. So rebutting, again, just look for comparables. We send them over. Then we have a conversation. What we request the appraiser to do is if they will use them, use them. If they won't, tell us why. And then we're kind of the moderator in between you and them to try to get new comparables. There is occasions where we look at the appraisal, very rarely, because we use some of the best appraiser, all of the best ones actually in the area. But upon occasion that we will totally throw out an appraisal and order a new one if there's too much issue about it, or it looks like the comps just simply were not the best. That doesn't happen very often because, again, we use the best appraisers that are in town. So they usually do a very good job. That really is all there is. It's largely up to your relationship with your lender and what their policy is for rebutting the appraisals. We're open.
I have a thought. One of the first things I do when I get an order on a purchase, and especially if it's 20,000 over listing. Hold on, I got this question thing coming up. I'm going to back out. Okay, there we go. When I contact the listing agent, I quiz them. Okay. Because I ask them for tell me about this property and the orders and the backup offers. And also, if something doesn't quite look right, I think there's going to be an issue. If they have a comp or two that they had that supports that, have them send it to me. Okay, so right out of the block, before it's even done, it's like taking care of business. And on the other end, let's say that an order does not come into value. What I do is I'll contact that agent. I'll say, is there something I'm not looking at? Do you have a comparable? And I had a situation where one of my, kind of a rural neighborhood, one of my listing comps, which is not tied to the sold, actually was ready to close within the week. And that agent within that office, an agent within the office had that information, and that actually supported the value. The comparables didn't really do that because they were historical. This one did, and I used it, and it did help close the deal. So I ask a lot of questions. If you've got something that over the listing price, I'm not going to let the agent off the hook by just saying, well, that's what they agreed upon. I'm going to ask them some tough questions even before I head out there, because then I have an idea if there's something going on there too.
I've experienced something similar. There's no question that when you have low inventory and you have interest in a property, that you're going to get over asking price offers. And the agents are doing a real great job in pricing these properties, and they're sometimes shocked. Well, they don't want to feel like I've priced this too low. It just happens to be the moment, the interest in the market. From an appraisal process, I can't be an advocate for a buyer, a seller. I'm not even an advocate for the lender. I'm an advocate only for the report that I produce. And so the report has to look back at that historical data. The data is the data. So if we can determine there's a market change, and just like Lanny said, that he's got support that there are several other situations happening right now in the market that are showing this big increase, then we have some proof. We have to be reliable. We have to give reliable data. And if we don't have that, it's not going to reflect in an appraisal. If it just happens to be a one-up situation, but everything else in a particular neighborhood is a lot lower, we're going to get asked real quickly, is this over improved? And the only way you can show that it's not over improved for a market is by having comparables that really are similar. And if those don't exist, or they're not happening with the pendings, listings that have offers, et cetera. That is hard proof for us to provide. And we're not there to rubber stamp that contract. We're there to find the data that's going to be underwritten for that collateral.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes it takes a little digging to get that information, and that's what our job is to do too.
And they will. A lot of appraisers will take the extra steps and not just look at the MLS. They'll try to search for sale by owners. They'll call the counties and see what have sold. They go to the extra distance to try to make sure they are using the best comparables and that they've looked at the true market. Not everything is through the MLS. So they frequently will get properties from outside of that if they're available.
Well, another thing too is there could be. I asked if it's a related party transaction. That could be a biggie, because if it's a parent selling a property to a son or daughter, and they wanted to give the equity to them, that's important. And if you don't know, if it's a related party, we disclose that, but that could make a big difference between, the sale price and the actual value of that house.
I do want to make a note. I'm sure that all the agents on this call are aware, but we do have to provide the entire purchase agreement to the appraiser. So it is really important up front that you provide your lender with all pages, all addendums. Unfortunately, what will happen occasionally is we have a sales price based on what you gave us, but 2 days after you gave it, there was a little bit more negotiation, and we don't get that addendum that changes the sales price. When the appraisal's already in and we already have a value, it gets dicey. It's a little hard sometimes to go back and say, oh, wait a minute, we need to try to increase that value by $2,000 because they negotiated after what you saw. So it really is important to make sure your lender has all addendums as quickly as possible to provide over to the appraiser so they can have an accurate view of what's going on with that property.
That's a good point too. I always ask and verify the sale price as I'm flipping through the order, and they'll say, no, there's an addendum on da-da-da that, and I may not have that. Again, going out with all that, as much information as possible is just very important, especially that amended sale price, especially.
So I see a couple of questions here regarding out-of-area appraisers coming in. Really, just to touch on that, that's just a result of maybe the lender using an appraisal management company where they're not controlling the process of the appraisal, the ordering of the appraisal. That's where we don't do that. We use local appraisers for each area, so we know that they have local knowledge. But really, that's just a result of the lender's appraisal ordering process, or if they hire a third party to do that for them. So
one point that needs to be made is that appraiser that's coming out to the property could be from out of the area, but needs to be competent in this area. And if not, they need to decline the order. I'm not sure if you're seeing that a lot. I know I stay close to home. I'll get orders even in my coverage area or something that I possibly could do, but it's on a border where I'd need comparables from 2 or 3 other MLSs, and I'll decline them just because I'm not sure if, I got half competency on the west side, but the east side not. So I just don't want to put myself out there for that type of scrutiny.
That is one of the many reasons why at Dart Bank, we don't use the AMCs, because we can't control that. One of the first things I do on an out of area property, where I'm not familiar with the appraiser, is look to see where they're at. And I really get uncomfortable when I see an appraisal that is 3 counties away from where my property is. And I've seen that on if we're doing, one that comes to mind was an Illinois property that we did. The appraiser was from a ways away. So I sent an email and said, hey, can you talk to me a little bit about your competency? And they were competent, but it makes me a little nervous when they don't know. Now, Lanny's right. They should. If it's not their area, they should deny the appraisal. They don't always do that. And sometimes it's who's willing to do it for a low price is who the AMC uses. So we stay away from that just because we want the quality. We want to be able to communicate back and forth with our appraisers. If a rebuttal is needed, we want to make sure it's somebody that will return our calls, somebody that will work with us. There's thousands of reasons that we don't use an AMC company. They're not all bad. I don't want you to think they are, but it's a roll of the dice whether you get an appraiser in your area or not.
I think maybe we're approaching our last question here, but there are a couple kind of hand in hand. Where did it go? Okay, so do appraisers take into account upgrades on big ticket items like new roof, furnace, AC, water heater? And then kind of piggybacking on that, what about homes that have many updates beyond the comparable homes?
Well, we go ahead, Len.
Oh,
Well, I was going to just say on the condition of the property, we have to give a code of quality and a code of condition, and that's based on many things. So it could be roofing, it could be windows, there could be things on a house that nobody's changed carpet in 30 years, nobody's changed cupboards in 30 years, but they've got brand new mechanicals, brand new roof. So there's a balance when we're looking at all this data as to whether or not those details, those items are actually going to compare to other ones. So we may not find exactly the same identical upgrades, but we're going to be looking at it and giving it basically a rating, a condition rating. And as we compare it to other properties, we're going to look through those photos. That's why your MLS photos are super important. Your conversation on that MLS listing, even in private comments, wherever they need to be, so that for you as using it as a realtors for CMA, or we as appraisers for our appraisals, the more data we have, the more things we can see, then we can use that as our comparables, and we can kind of know where those adjustments are. A non-list sale also may be excellent, but if all it says is non-list in that MLS, there's no detail. We don't know what's updated. We don't even know, you don't know as well when you're trying to use those in your market analysis. So all that MLS data, the more information we get, we can discern better whether or not those comparables are similar to this particular property. But yes, those big ticket items, those expenses, some of them are just maintenance, but most times we're going to be looking for comparables that are similar as possible. They're going to reflect those kind of similar, they might not be the same, but similar improvements.
I agree, Hans. That's and there's a spot on the appraisal, especially for kitchens and bathrooms when they're updated. Those are the, I guess, the real big ones. But the other big ones, roof, windows, flooring. When there is a real big cost item to that, I try to capture. I ask the person, how much did it cost? Because that may, you may have a new roof, but if they said it's a big roof, but it's only $5,000, it may have been a cheap new roof versus a nice one. They'll tell you about the 50-year warranty or things of that nature. I think the part of the question was, can you have something over improved that no other properties are like that? The answer is yes, but as an appraiser, I will find something. That's where you might get a square footage off or something that's out of the farther than normal. You try to find something that has that quality and condition, and it may not be the best comp, but what it does show the underwriter is the saleability and marketability of a high quality, high condition property. And then we may put very little weight on that, but there is weight because it shows that marketability. And that's a biggie, I think, in the underwriting realm of it. But I talk about all the improvements. That's the first thing I do, even on the phone with a homeowner, if possible, or the agent. Or as Hans put, the non-list sales with one picture and no description, and it looks like a really nice house. Pictures would be nice and a description would be nice, because that'll help everybody out in the future too.
Yeah, on the underwriting side, we're looking for marketability for everything. You know, we have to take this home back. How easy is it going to be to market? That's one bedrooms are a little harder to market. So we're looking to make sure that we have the comps to support that. If they use a 2-bedroom comp, they need to tell me why somebody would buy that somebody would buy this. Why is it comparable to a 1-bedroom? Sometimes amenities that one person would think are great, somebody else don't think so, they're wonderful, so they could actually deter the sale. That's where we need the appraisers to come in and give more detail. They need to explain, they have a narrative. I mean, the appraisals are like 40 pages thick. And they can give us all kinds of details, and that's frequently when I say, hey, can you explain this? I'm looking for the day to directly say this does not affect marketability, or this does affect marketability. That's a hot point for not only the lender, but all the agencies.
That's a good point, because you have that proverbial house with 5 acres and a nice ranch with walkout, and then the pole barn that has a hoist and some stalls in it for animals. And one person may look at that and just go, this is great. Another person may look at it as work and a white elephant. So that's the line you toe, and that's why sometimes in the comparable search, we need to find those homes with a large outbuilding that supports marketability, because the underwriters are looking for that.
Yeah, we are. Sometimes we'll have amenities that if you can't find comparables, we ask them to take the value away. Let's just use that one for the sake of this conversation. If we have a property that has an outbuilding and the appraiser gave it $5,000 worth of value, but none of my comps have outbuildings, that $5,000 was not supported. So I would email them and say either support it or remove that from the appraisal.
I do find that often. Yeah, I was going to say, Debbie, I find often that I'm spending more time making sure that I bracket those features so that you, as a risk analysis underwriter, can look at it and say, okay, yes, there are homes with pole barns, riding arenas, etc., in the market, and that I may think I've got this appraisal comped in 1 hour's time, and the next thing I know, I'm spending 4 hours digging real deep to make sure that I can support in a market that we've just had, where there's been increases in interest and limited properties. It is really our job to look deep into finding out whether or not these amenities that we're going to show for value are bracketed in those appraisals, so that when you see it, you have a conclusion that this risk is reasonable.
Yes.
Good point, Hans. The bracketing feature is just in simple. Every major item in that house, if you can't find the exact square footage, you better find one real close to it and one above it and one below it. So when you do your math, it self-corrects. The same with bathrooms, bedrooms, the site, outbuildings, quality, condition, everything. They're looking for those. And also, they mentioned if they were to get a loan back, this protects us as appraisers to show that we were thinking about all those things. And if you do all those things and you have good comparables, the first thing that they try to do is they go after the appraiser because we have the insurance. But it's more like a scare tactic. If you've done your work, you just shoot it back at them, and then they don't bother you anymore.
Aaron, you're muted. And we do need to go until 10:10. So
Okay.
go through the questions and use what you find necessary.
Actually,
I think we
go down the list here that talked about our agents allowed to talk to appraisers was one question that I saw here. And from my perspective, the answer is yes. You get a lot of information. They're not out to try to influence or anything like that. But I find a wealth of information, especially if there's not a lot of improvement information in the listing. they can go into a lot more detail, or even provide me a list of the detail between the time I talk to them and the time that I do the inspection, or just after.
And that is during our prior to actually delivering a report. Once the report's been done, if it hasn't, then we've got that rebuttal. If there's an issue with value, that's when each lender is going to be very particular about how that communication goes. But you're right, Lanny, ahead of time, getting the data from the agents, having them share with us their thoughts and details, totally fine. And sometimes agents are going to want to provide a list of their comparables. They may not always meet the criteria that we have to use. I'd say to any agent, any broker that hasn't sat down or talked to an appraiser about where our guidelines are for appraisals, I should say for comp data, talk to them, because sometimes you have to be within a certain distance of a house. Again, sizes have to be similar, etc. So it's a comparable that is not a comparable to an appraiser might be in your list. And that's when it is nice to have a conversation at one point along that way with an appraiser to find out whether or not, am I comping this the same way you would? What are you doing? So that is helpful. So I engage with agents a lot.
I think this is a good question. I have questions about it too, about appraising new construction versus existing homes. And can new construction homes be used for comps?
Well, there's partially, and there's a market for new construction homes. There's no question, and we see it. It's awesome when a builder belongs to the multiple list, builds a spec house. We see it go on the market. We see how long it sells. Maybe they have several that they're marketing, and we can see a real consistency in those new build neighborhoods. So those new builds are comparables. Somebody that buys land in 2018 and then builds a house in 2020, and that data makes it into the MLS, it's not really, that's combined data. That means that maybe an agent provided something in the MLS and said, hey, I sold this build job for $500,000. There's no mention that the land was purchased 2 years ago for $100,000. It's really not a comparable, because it's really, at that point, it's one person made a decision to build a house on a tract of land they own. But if it's actually data that has a more speculative view in the market, something that would be in subdivisions or in locations where we're getting consistent, we're buying the land at the same time as the house, and these are consistently happening, then we have new construction data that we can use as comparables. Like I said, your bigger builders are definitely putting that. Your smaller builders may not have that information. They may not even be using that MLS data. They may be requesting that the buyer buy their own land separately at a prior time and then combining it together. And that's where it starts to get real dicey as to whether or not that's comparable data. Does that help a little bit?
Now, a new 1 or 2 year old property would be a good comparable, because that property is very similar in age, size, style, and the whole package has been exposed to the market with the land and the actual building of the house in that location. That's what they're looking for as well. So you can use the new construction, but you also need to pull something out of the market that has the whole package, the land and the house and the location and all the similar amenities.
And that's an excellent way too, Lanny, to see whether or not these properties that are specifically built recently have a market beyond that one particular buyer. Because when you don't have something exposed to the market, you don't know how many other people are actually interested in buying that property. And so if it sells a year later or 2 years later, or if it was a builder's spec, which are really rare, then we can really get an idea of reasonable market exposure. And then the lender looks at that risk and says, hey, there's a comparable that we can see, or here's a property, even the subject property. There are many times where somebody builds a house that they wanted and they need to sell it a year or two later, and it doesn't sell for what that construction cost was, because it was really specific and costly at that time. There's other situations in a lot of these subdivisions where New construction cost is going up so quickly. Timeframes are out. So you'll see a $50,000, $100,000 increase in value in a 2-year period. And that makes me smile because I say, okay, here we are. We've proven that this market is still strong and going on. We're seeing it in the comp data. I'm seeing this listing $100,000 more a few years later, or 10,000, 15, whatever it is, proving that even though we've got construction costs going up, that these properties weren't just built during a high construction cost bubble.
Good point.
Mhm.
Thank you all so much. Aaron, sorry, I see that you're muted. I didn't even know you were talking. I did post the final poll question. So please, if you have not answered that, please do so now. That is for your continuing education credit. We have so much great content. I have saved all the questions that we have not had a chance to get to yet so that we can use those in the future. Aaron, did you want to say something to close it out?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Alrighty, I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us. Debbie, Aaron, Lanny, and Hans. I think that today was a wealth of information for everybody. And like I said, I have saved all of these questions that we have not had a chance to get to yet so that we can address those in some way in the future. And I'm surprised at how many measuring questions that we had. So we are going to be posting a measurement guide in our Facebook group and on Flex. So you guys can look forward to that, and maybe that will answer some more of your measuring questions and give you something to refer to going forward. So again, thank you to everybody who participated, and thank you for everyone who attended.